Okay, great. Let's see if I can just get that to move away. Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Public Librarians Chat, finding out what the library user really wants to know. And this webinar will hopefully be helpful for anyone who's ever provided reference assistance to someone, only to find out that the information that the person initially asked for wasn't what they really wanted or needed to know. And I think that's probably happened to everyone who's ever worked in a library. So this afternoon, I will outline the steps involved in conducting a reference interview, describe some reference interview behaviors you'll want to avoid, and review question techniques you may use to expand or clarify the reference query. All of this information, hopefully, will help you find out what the library really wants to know when you're working with them. So just a brief overview of the goal of reference service. So ultimately, the goal of any reference service is to connect people to the information they need when they need it. Requests for reference assistance may come in a variety of forms. It may be an in-person request at the circulation desk, or an out-of-state phone call, or an email request from someone living within your own community. Regardless of the format in which the reference request arrives, it's important that you take the time to conduct a reference interview, which is a short interview designed to ascertain what the person really wants to know, so you can answer that question accurately using the resources available in your library. So yay, looks like we have more people joining us, and we're very happy about that. So welcome everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. And if at any point during the webinar you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to do so. My only request is that when you aren't going to ask a question, that you go ahead and mute your microphone so we don't get any feedback, okay? So what is the reference interview? It's been described in a number of different ways. Catherine Sheldrick Ross, one of the co-authors of Conducting the Reference Interview, describes a reference interview this way. A good reference interview is a collaboration. User and librarian are equal partners in the search with different areas of expertise. The user is the expert in the question itself and knows how the question arose and what information is missing in his or her understanding of the topic and how the information will be used. The library staff member is the expert on the library system and the organization and the retrieval of information, and both need to work together. Carolyn Mulak, author of The Fundamentals of Reference, she describes the reference interview as a process by which a reference librarian, through a series of questions, determines exactly what the patron is looking for. And personally, I like to think of the reference interview as a short conversation that not only helps the librarian determine what the patron wants, but also helps that patron clarify their own thoughts and articulate exactly what it is that they need. So many people are afraid or even ashamed to admit when they don't know something. And when a library patron needs assistance, they will initially ask a very general question when what they really need to know is something very specific. And as librarians, we don't want to necessarily wait for the patron to initiate the reference interview. When we see someone in the library who looks like they might need assistance, it's really important for us to approach them, introduce ourselves, and ask them how we can help. And so it doesn't need to be a formal process. Whenever you see someone looking for information, you can approach them and ask them if you can help them find what they're looking for. And more often than not, it will lead to a reference transaction. So among library authorities, there's been this debate on whether or not a reference interview is always needed. Every time you are talking to someone who's looking for information, do you need to conduct a reference interview? So in the Conducting the Reference Interview book, one of the books I used for preparing this webinar, the authors described the two myths associated with the belief that a reference interview isn't always needed. And then they go on and they argue quite strenuously against these myths. So the first myth is because users are often pretty sure about their information needs, the reference interview is unnecessary. The second myth is the onus is on the user to know what he or she wants and express the need clearly. Librarians should take the user's question at face value. Personally, I find that second myth kind of offensive myself. The onus is on the user to know what he or she wants and that they have to express it clearly. Often when people come into our library, they don't know what resources are available to them. That's why they're coming to us for assistance. And it's up to us to help inform them of what resources we have available in the library, what resources we have available online, what's available to them statewide, for instance, the SLED databases. Catherine Shelder-Gross argues that library staff should conduct a reference interview every time they are engaged in a reference transaction. She believes the time spent conversing with the library patron and clarifying their information needs equals to less time spent looking for the wrong information source, which will ultimately lead to a happier library patron. And she also argues that the reference interview doesn't need to be extensive. A few simple questions are often all that is needed to clarify a question. And as many patrons are unfamiliar with how libraries are organized and what resources are available to them, it's important that we, put ourselves in our patrons' shoes and view the library from their perspective. Surely all of us have experienced how discomforting it can be to have to ask for assistance, especially when you're unsure exactly how to describe what it is that you're looking for or the assistance that you need. So patrons need our assistance to find the information that they need, and the goodwill we create when we take the time to help people is valuable in garnering community support. So on here, I've gone and listed the pros of always conducting a reference interview. It gives you a chance to talk to the patron. Ultimately, you'll spend less time searching for the wrong material. You'll end up with a satisfied patron, and the patron views the librarian as helpful. When you don't do that, some librarians feel that they're extremely busy and they simply don't have time to talk to patrons. So for them, having to talk to a patron isn't necessarily a positive thing. Ultimately, they will both have to spend more time searching, the patron and the library staff trying to help them. They'll end up with a frustrated patron, and then the patron will ultimately view the librarian as unhelpful. So fortunately for those of us in the library field, we have these guidelines for behavioral performance of reference and information service providers. These guidelines were originally adopted in 1996 by the Reference and User Services Association, RUSA, of the American Library Association, and they were updated in 2011. And the intent of the guidelines is to identify and recommend observable behavioral attributes that could be correlated with positive patron perceptions of reference library performance. And what I love about it is it really spells out to us how we are supposed to be interacting with library patrons when they come to us with a reference request. And the way the guidelines are set up, it's not just for that in-person behavior. There's also guidelines for how to interact with people when you're dealing with them in a remote fashion, whether they're calling you on the phone or you're conducting a reference transaction through email. And there's basically 5 components to the guidelines. The first component is visibility and approachability. The second is interest. The third is listening and inquiring. The fourth is searching. And the fifth is follow-up. The guidelines are designed so you can see how each behavior can be applied in general, both in person and remotely, in person or just remotely. These guidelines can be used to inform yourself of how you should behave, or the behavior you should exhibit when you're conducting a reference transaction. It could be used by supervisor to determine how staff should be, how kind of like the goals that staff should be working towards when they're working or delivering reference services. So the guidelines can be used in a lot of different ways. So they're very straightforward. So I put the URL here, and I'm hoping that everyone will go and actually visit, print them off, and read through them. So remote reference service. At the State Library, we deal in this realm quite a bit, and I'm sure other libraries do as well. I've gone ahead and I've included a screenshot from Anchorage Public Library. And a lot of libraries include a little Ask a Librarian link, which often takes you to an online form so that people who are at home, at school, at work, wherever, can fill out the form and send their reference request directly to library staff at their local library. So changes in technology has really impacted how all of us interact with, how we interact with our patrons, and also how information is accessed. And I think we're seeing more of a trend where people are initially trying to solve their reference service on their own. They're either Googling a question or whatever. And then after they've been unsuccessful, they're then coming to the library. And they could be coming to us with a telephone call, through an email message, or actually walking into the library. But when they're coming in, when they're coming to us remotely, it's really important that we still conduct a reference interview with all of those 5 components that I just mentioned earlier: approachability, interest, listening. I have to go back to listening, inquiring, searching, and following up. But it's just that we have to do those things in kind of a different fashion. So reference librarians need to feel just as comfortable interacting with users remotely as they do talking to people face-to-face in the library. And, conducting a reference transaction over the phone or through email is challenging because the transactions lack the visual and nonverbal cues that are so important in communication. Library staff providing virtual reference assistance need to have excellent customer service skills, solid online searching techniques, and be familiar with those libraries' online resources. So in his article, The Application of RUSA Standards for the Virtual Reference Interview, Howard R. Schwartz describes how each of the 5 components of a traditional reference transaction, approachability, interest, listening, inquiry, searching, and follow-up, can be done in an online environment. So approachability is letting the library know you are available to provide assistance. And in an online environment, this may be done by adding an Ask a Librarian link to the library's webpage that directs users to an online form they may use to submit a reference question. How a library staff member responds to that initial reference request will really set the tone for the entire transaction. Library staff can indicate interest by sending the patron written or prepared email prompts, and the prompts could thank the user for using the service and inform them that they should expect to receive a follow-up email within a set amount of time. It could be a day or hour, depending on your staffing. The prompt could also inform the user to call the library if they require immediate assistance. Library staff can demonstrate listening in a remote reference transaction by sending the library user a message identifying the main objectives of the request as they read them in that user's initial email, and seeking clarification from the user that this is correct. The library user should be given a chance to respond before the library staff begins searching for an answer. To convey understanding, the library staff should rephrase the request in his or her own words. And before searching, library staff need to find out what search strategies the user has already conducted. It's important that the library staff include the patron in the search process by informing them of the strategy that's going to be undertaken. Citations and a description of where and how the results were located should be included with any of the results that the librarian shares with the library user. And a follow-up is conducted when the library staff asks the user whether or not their question has been fully answered. So I think it's somewhat similar, actually there's a lot of, parallels between working with somebody in person as to doing it online. But what's really important is how you set the tone and the language that you use when you're writing to someone. Sometimes emails can be, sometimes we're very busy and we can send a very sparse email, and that person may take it as a very terse tone, when simply you're just trying to get the facts, without using a lot of superfluous language. So you have to be careful with how you address people when you're talking to them online. Do we have any questions about remote reference service? Does anyone want to share any of their own experiences working with people remotely, providing reference service remotely? Okay. I will move on. So when I was preparing for this webinar, I was really struck by how important the personal, interpersonal skills of the reference library staff are. So much of what we do when we're working with somebody individually and helping them with reference, so much of the process is all about communication. And it's not until you get down towards the end of the transaction, when you actually start conducting the search, that other skills kind of become really important. But in order to interact positively with patrons, reference librarians, or any library staff conducting reference service, they need to be effective listeners and have strong verbal and written communication skills. Personal traits such as empathy, a sense of humor, creativity, and a strong customer service orientation are also really important. More than anything, staff conducting reference should enjoy working with the public, should enjoy researching the research process, and they really need to have a kind of a broad educational background. As so much of their time is going to be spent working one-on-one with the patrons, they really have to have excellent customer service skills. So you don't want to put your grumpiest person on the reference desk. I mean, we all have staff who have different strengths, and some people really love being out working with the public and other people don't. So when you're making those staffing decisions, you really want to have the person who really gives off that very friendly, approachable vibe working in that position. So really, teaching, believe it or not, is an integral part of reference service. And it can take place formally through workshops. Often reference staff are called upon to lead workshops on, like, how to deal with fake news, or how to deal with spam or scams, online scams, financial literacy, a variety of topics. And also, the instruction can also take place informally when they're working one-on-one to help a patron locate a resource within the library or online. So the goal of any instruction that reference staff provide is to teach the library users how to find the information themselves so that they can grow their own research expertise. And so any experience from any of you guys on teaching in the library? Just want any stories of teaching, working one-on-one with patrons in the library? Okay.
Sometimes it's a fine line between teaching somebody.
Did I hear something?
You can. Oh. No.
No, go ahead. My mic was very low. Is that better?
Can you hear me?
I can. Who is this?
Oh, this is Jennifer at Egan Library.
Oh, hi, Jennifer. Well, then you must have lots of experience working with students.
Yeah. What I was thinking is sometimes it's a fine line between having it be a teaching moment, and sometimes the person just wants you to find something and get it in their hands. And I feel as if you kind of have to figure out the difference there, because if they're impatient and they don't really want to learn anything right that second, I think it's okay for us to just get them what they want.
Right. You know, Jennifer, when I was preparing this, I was going to include the ACRL framework, and then I decided no, I will keep it focused on the public. But the way that I read that framework is that it really was to kind of that what you mentioned is that using reference transactions as a teaching opportunity and taking time with the students to kind of expand their knowledge of the resources or services. But you're right, people are busy and they are not always receptive if they feel like they have to like plod through this little instructional component to get what they want.
Yeah, but I think generally speaking, we do very much approach our work at the reference desk as as a as a teaching, we're teaching when we're there, and it is a great it's fun, and it's a great point of contact to uh, like you said, to introduce them to some resources they might not be aware of yet, and to teach them how to empower them to get to those sources on their own.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments very much.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Jessie from Egan Library.
Hi, Jessie.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up and say thank you to Jennifer, my supervisor, and thank you for making that link. And if you have any tips on like remote reference service and teaching, I don't know if any participants have any tips that might be helpful, like tools that you use or just different things that you discovered providing reference service. Thanks.
Okay. Well, there is at the end of the slides, there's some different citations to different articles that you might find useful.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. It's so much nicer when people talk, I have to say. Okay. Okay, so we earlier we were kind of discussing how to conduct a reference interview remotely, and so now we're going to just focus on how to apply the 5 main components of a reference interview in person. And conducting a reference interview requires strong interpersonal communication skills. And so like notice on the slide that all of the behavioral skills, visibility, approachability, interest, listening, inquiring, required before you ever actually begin conducting the search process. So first impressions are generally made in less than 30 seconds, which is why it's so important that library staff working with the public need to be viewed as friendly and approachable. This first component of the reference transaction is critical, and if staff are viewed as dismissive, grumpy, or demeaning to patrons, they're going to avoid them, and they're never going to come up to them and ask for assistance, which means that they're never going to get the help that they need, and they're never going to have an opportunity to view librarians as helpful people, right? So it's really important that we have that when we're out there in the desk that we're smiling and enjoying what we do. It's during that initial contact with the library user that it's the librarian who sets the tone, right, for the reference interview. And library staff really need to make the person seeking assistance feel comfortable. They need to convey that they are trusted, objective partners with them in their search for information. When library staff are gathering factual information from the library user, they will need to ask some clarifying or expanding questions. They'll need to paraphrase what they've heard and verify with the patron that they understand what they understand the question to be is correct. It's important to include the user in the search process to let them know what search terms you're using, how and why you selected those terms, and seek the user's assistance as you winnow the search results. And this is an excellent way to teach library users to become better searchers themselves. And that process can be done even if someone comes to you and they're looking for a book in the library. You know, it's just that kind of talking out loud, explaining to them, okay, I'm going to go to the catalog and I'm going to search for the title. Oh, and here's the book. Here's the call number. I'm going to write this down. Now I'm going to go out into the stacks. I'm going to look for this call. It's just basically, including them in this process. So approachability. So we'll take each of these 5 things and we'll kind of expand on them a little bit. So a successful reference transaction requires a high level of visibility. And I really think it's interesting that this is included in the guidelines, because I've often come into libraries, whenever I travel, I try to pop into a library, and you'll see these gigantic circulations desks, and you'll find people faces down. They don't look up when you walk in the door. It's like they're hidden behind a huge monitor, or they're busily chatting to their coworker, and you're standing there, waiting to be seen. And you don't feel very good about that as a library patron. So I think it's great that they include in these guidelines that a library staff member is poised and ready to engage the patrons. They're looking for them to walk through the door, right? And as soon as they walk through the door, they're going to establish eye contact with them. They're going to acknowledge their presence by saying, hello, welcome to the library. Is there anything I can help you with? Think about those old, and it's been a while, I can't think of the name of the video store anymore, but there was this video store. Every time you walked in, there was just a person at the door greeting people, kind of like the Walmart greeter, just to make sure that you knew that they saw you and that they welcomed you into their business. And they just want to remain visible to the patron as much as possible. So any questions about approachability? Any stories that you want to share? And this doesn't mean that you have to stand behind the reference desk at all times. You can be out into the stacks, wandering around, just making yourself available. Okay. So interest. A successful librarian demonstrates a high degree of objective, non-judgmental interest in the reference transaction. While not every query will be of interest to the librarian should embrace each patron's information need and should be committed to providing the most effective assistance. And this comes, again, directly from the ALA guidelines for behavioral performance. And again, I love the piece about not every query will be of interest to the librarian, but that doesn't matter. It's what's important to the patron that's important. And we need to treat every patron with respect and every reference request as important. And we can demonstrate that with eye contact, by looking at the person when they're talking to you, by responding to their questions in a friendly tone of voice. Tone of voice, it really isn't what you say, it's how you say it and the impression it makes on the people that you're talking to. So sometimes you can be saying the nicest thing, but the tone of your voice can confer something else. And people are very sensitive to that. So again, these are all some other behaviors, face the user when speaking or listening to them. Maintain eye contact, nod occasionally when they're talking to you to signal that you understand, and don't be in a hurry. And I know oftentimes we all work at busy circulation desks, and there might be 3 people standing in line, but when you're dealing with the person in front of you, that should be your focus. And you can let other people know, and you can just say, I'm sorry, I'm going to help this person right now. As soon as I'm done with this individual, I'll get right to you. Just let them know that as soon as you're available, you'll help them as well. Okay, moving on to listening. So good listening is the foundation of all oral communication, and library staff must be able to listen carefully to the patron's question and respond in an encouraging way, asking questions to help clarify the request and ensure that it's completely understood. So listening isn't interrupting, and listening isn't filling in blanks. Listening is listening. Can't pretend to do it. You have to actually do it. You have to allow time for people to answer your questions, and so it means slowing down. Sometimes what I like to do is I like to write notes. And I often start by asking them if it's okay to get their name, their email, and phone number, because it may take me a while to find the information that they need, and I'll have that information so I can email it to them at a later date. Also, when I'm taking notes, it's not that I'm not looking at them, but I don't want to miss any information. So I might take a note and then I'll read it back to the person later on just to confer to make sure that I have the information correctly. So when you're listening, you also want to listen to what's important to the library user, identify the goals and objectives of their research needs, rephrase the questions, and request, again, that they confirm that what you've said is correct. Jen, since you're online, you work with students. Do you, when you're working with students, do you find that you talk to them in a manner differently than you would maybe an older person coming into the library?
I mean, I think I adjust to each individual that comes in front of me. I'm always, like you said, trying to listen and trying to express interest in their research question, and I usually am genuinely interested. So I guess I would say I'm adapting to every single person, whether they're a student, a member of the public, or an older person. I think sometimes maybe students need they might need more hand holding, or kind of introduction to the concept that it's kind of a process that if they're on an actual research project, that it's going to be a process, so it's not necessarily a quick answer, that they may have to do some of the work, and I'm kind of getting them started. And it's something where I'm a friendly person for them to ask these questions, and I can get them started on their way, and then let them know that they're always welcome back, as more questions will come up, because they always do. So
nice. Yeah, I love it. I'm normally generally interested too. Sometimes you almost have to tone down your own enthusiasm for the reference or the research. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, inquiring. So when asking the library user questions about their reference request, library staff can ask questions in different ways, and the form in which you ask the question kind of determines the answer you're likely to get. So open-ended questions allow people to answer in their own way. They can elaborate as much as possible. So open-ended questions tend to lead to much longer answers, and sometimes that's really important to get a good understanding of what it is that they're looking for. Closed questions are questions that require either a yes or a no, or the person needs to make a choice between two different options. And a closed question requires basically requires the person to kind of restrict their answer, and also normally it elicits a shorter answer. So what I have found with working with people in the library is that library staff just shouldn't feel this rush to immediately answer the library's users' face value question. Often somebody comes up to us and they say, I'm looking for so-and-so. And immediately the library staff person begins searching for stuff without ever asking them any additional information. So it's really important to take this time to clarify the question before you start trying to come up with an answer. And really avoid making any assumptions about why the person needs the information, how they're going to use it, their prior knowledge of the subject, even their point of view on it. We don't need to interject, as it says here, any value judgments about what it is that they're looking for. We need to respect their privacy and their confidentiality, and we just need to be neutral, fair, and just approach it in a very professional manner. So if somebody comes up and they ask for an article, you can ask them if they have a citation. If they come up to you and they're using a lot of acronyms in the reference request, you can ask them to explain what the acronyms stand for or any other jargon that they could be using. As I mentioned before, take notes so that you have their contact information so you can get back to them if it's going to take a lot more time to find the information. If it's really involved, let them know it may take you a day or so to find the information. Oftentimes I ask the person, when do you need this information by? Because it may be they don't need it for 3 months. They're just interested in the topic, but they don't have any there's no date that they need it by. Other times, probably in an academic setting, they're working to complete an assignment and they might need it very, very soon. If you're stumped, reach out to your colleagues. In Alaska, we have the 1-800 reference number for small public libraries. They can contact staff at the Anchorage Public Library and get additional reference assistance that way. But when you report back to the patron, just be sure to include all of the steps that you've taken and any of the search terms you've used to locate the information. And I always try to think of it as a way for them, if they were going to model, to use that information to replicate the results. Give them enough information so that they can represent the results that you've given. So the reason there's 2 little book covers with one says dogs and the other one says home cooking for dogs is if someone comes up to your library and they're asking, do you have any books on dogs? And if you take that at that face value, you say, oh, yes, what is it, 636.7, I think, in Dewey, write it down, point them in the direction and send them off. But what they're really looking for is maybe they want to make their own dog biscuits, healthy treats for their dogs at home. So while that will probably be in the same general area, you didn't actually ask them specifically what they were looking for. You didn't actually help them find exactly what it was that they were looking for. You just kind of sent them into that general question. And that's not ideal. So here's some examples of open-ended questions. What would you like to know about X? So with the dog example, I could say, what would you like to know about dogs? I would like to make my own dog biscuits. Well, there you go. Okay. What sort of material do you have in mind? Is it an article? Is it a book? Is it, I don't know, a thesis, something else? What else can you tell me about X? So again, you want to use open-ended questions to encourage the patron to expand on the request and present additional information. Please tell me more about your topic. What additional information can you give me about the subject? All kinds of different open-ended questions. Clarifying questions are those closed-ended. What have you already found? It's really important to find out what they've already done. They might have already done a lot of stuff, and you don't want to be, standing there kind of replicating what they've already done before. That's not very helpful to them. So find out what they've already done. What searches have they already done? Again, do you need a book, an article? Do you need current, historical? What do you already know about this topic? Again, some kind of clarifying questions. Any questions about clarifying or open-ended questions? Okay. All right. Well, we're moving on to the search process. So the search process is the portion of the reference transaction in which the librarian's behavior, all of those previous things of approachability, visibility, interest, inquiry, listening, and now their own professional searching skills kind of come together. So without a solid understanding of what information is being sought and an effective search, the information the library user wants and needs isn't going to be found, right? So you really need to have both of those things. You need to have a good understanding of what they need, You need to have really constructed a complete, competent search strategy, and then you need to have the skills in order to kind of execute that strategy. So constructing a competent, complete search strategy involves selecting search terms that are most relevant to the information desired, verifying the spelling and other possible factual errors in the original question. Oftentimes people have the name and it may be spelled incorrectly. They could have the date that article was published incorrect, or even where it was published. They could have the wrong. They'd be looking in the wrong newspaper or whatever. And then identifying appropriate sources that are most likely to contain the information relevant to the patron's question. So this really is where knowledge about what resources are located in your library's reference collection and any online resources your library subscribes to or has access to is critical. And I used to spend, when I used to spend hours on the circulation desk, when I didn't have patrons, I was always out in the reference collection, just rooting around in there, shelf reading, pulling out the resources, looking to see what they contain and how they could ultimately be useful to someone. A lot of libraries have much smaller reference collections than they used to be because so much of the information is now found elsewhere. Also, the cost of those books is so expensive, and a lot of those books are no longer even being published. So it's really important that you know where to find information. If you're not sure where to start, a good place to start is always, start at your own library catalog. Expand if your library isn't part of the Alaska Library Catalog, check their catalog. Look at WorldCat. Look at SLED. You can go and look at SLED. Do you guys have any other places that you like to start with a request? Tried and true places to start? Okay, well, moving on. So in his article, Reference Service Every Time It's Personal, David A. Tykeson states that when a library staff member helps someone with a reference request, and I'm kind of paraphrasing what he wrote, they're focusing directly on the needs of that one person. So one staff person working with one library user at a time. And as staff help that person, they are offering that library user personalized assistance, which in this day and age is rare. When you think about it, we don't get personalized assistance very much anymore. And this assistance is what makes reference work so rewarding for library staff and so important to our library users. So when this work is done well, there are really lasting positive consequences. The library user will recall not only that their information need was addressed and met, they will recall how the experience of being helped felt. Right. So research has proven that library users will go back to a librarian that has tried to help them and left them feeling positive about the experience, even if that librarian was unable to actually help them find an answer to their question. It's how they felt about the experience that mattered the most. So this can seem kind of counterintuitive, right? That in providing reference service, it's the personal relationships that we create with the library users that matter the most, not necessarily the answers that we find to their questions. That doesn't mean that library staff should feel free to conduct careless searches or be haphazard. We still have to be completely professional, and we need to be accurate, provide accurate information timely in a timely manner to our patrons. But I think it's really important that people who deliver reference services, that they keep it in mind that it's this personal transaction that's taking place. We need to let the people know that we care about them and we care about their information need, because that's what's really over time will be most important to our patrons, right? Anybody want to share a positive patron reference experience? I can't tell you about receiving cards in the mail from people who were so grateful that from out of state that they received information that they wanted. Being actually included in books, the people were working on books and they list you as somebody who actually helped them get their material. It's very rewarding, but mostly it's just how grateful they are. And sometimes, believe it or not, it's those people that you don't even necessarily spend the most amount of time helping that are the most grateful. I can tell you in my own experience, I've spent like tons of time trying to help somebody with a reference request, only to get nothing at the end. And then other times you feel like you're just doing your job and somebody's like over the moon. So it's really, it can really vary. But every time it's very rewarding when you get to help somebody find what they're looking for. So, of course, not every reference transaction is positive, right? Lots of them aren't. About, I don't know, I think I remember seeing a percentage of 35% of reference transactions, the people getting helped did not feel that it was successful on their end. They didn't feel that the librarian listened to them, that the librarian didn't seem interested in their question, the librarian didn't smile, and also the librarian didn't look up from the computer. All of those are kind of are behaviors that left the library user feeling ignored, dismissed, or not important, right? So we want to avoid those. Other things that we want to avoid is, as I illustrated earlier with the little dog reference transaction, just giving the patron a call number and pointing them to the stacks, just assuming that they know what that number on that piece of paper means and where to find that item in the library. Failing, again, to conduct a reference interview. And, again, a reference interview is just a few questions. When they come up to you and they ask you a question, you just start typing without talking to them. You don't explain to them what you're doing, the search process that you're conducting. Asking them, did you check the catalog? Just being kind of, that's not very helpful to someone that comes up to you. You can take their question and you can say, I think what I'll do first is I'll check the catalog and see if it's there. It's that kind of that finger pointing type of accusational type question there. So all of these habits are really indicators of poor customer service. And in each of them, what do you think the library staff should have done instead? Probably talking and typing, conducting a reference interview, walking the person over to the stacks, explaining to them how the call numbers are associated to the books on the shelves, all of that. Okay. Well, normally I don't do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to kind of scroll down. So this webinar is being recorded, so we will have a link to the recording on our Archive Librarians webinars webpage. And we will also have a copy of our slides that will be available in a PDF. I did want to point out this conducting a reference interview video recording that is available at the State Library for checkout. It was really well done, and I found it's very brief. It's something that can be used during a staff meeting by someone who just wants to do a refresher with their staff about how to conduct a librarian reference interviews. And then this was the book that I mentioned a couple times. And then there was I think there was another one. Here it is. Someone asked about the application of the virtual reference. So this is that article by Schwartz and Barry Trott, the application of RUSA standards to the virtual reference interview. It would be very helpful to you, Jesse, I think, if you were to watch that. Or not watch it, but read it. Okay, so any other questions? I would love to hear from you guys about what kind of experiences you're having at your libraries. If you thought this was helpful in any way, I'd be happy to hear anything you guys have to say.
This is Jennifer. I thank you, Julie. I thought that was really helpful, and we were just chatting here about just that kind of approachability and smiling and that kind of thing, and how we notice all the time the less than perfect customer service in stores or in other departments at the university, and just it makes a huge difference, and it's really tough. I mean, even as a librarian, if I have a reference question, even I'm shy about asking for help a lot of times. And so when somebody isn't so welcoming or make me feel good about that asking that question, it's just yeah, it makes you not want to ask more questions.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's unfortunate. Unfortunately, we see it a lot. You know, people. I guess if they were able to see themselves as other people see them, you know, faces down, and they could be just intently working on something, but that look, it just doesn't come across as approachable, and someone walking in and seeing that would just think, oh, they're avoiding me, they don't want to talk to me, or they feel like they're disturbing you, and that whatever it is that you're doing is much more important than they are, and that's just not right either. So
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys very much for attending. It really is nice to have people on the other end. Very much. And if you have any questions, please contact me. You have my email, julieniederhauser@alaska.gov, and I'll be happy to help you any way that I can. So thank you.